Hello? Beep, 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 beep. Welcome to the Court of the Edijester. How the hell are we? What's going on, peepods? How we been doing? Welcome to another episode. Well, it's all happening. So, as you will already know, we've discussed before. Become a warrior teacher, by the way. Subscribe, hit the subscribe button, buy me a coffee if you can. Anything that you can do to help to keep me going. We're at that certain point, I'm afraid. We need to get people on board for the programme so that I can keep going. Now, here's the interesting thing, you see. Now, we've all discussed this before, or we've all had this has been talking point for quite some time, but I've got the funny feeling it's about to reach a tipping point, so it's probably a good idea if we bring up the subject again. And that subject is medical experimentation on children in the name of research. Now, it's a particular worry for those of us involved in the movement, or whatever you want to call it, that they are planning to experiment on kids with puberty blockers, these so-called clinical trials. Now, I'm of the opinion, and always have been of the opinion, that you ain't doing that, because what they're doing is they're going to be doing it with effeminate boys. That's what it's going to be, because that was the cohort was always young effeminate boys. Look right back at the Dutch nonsense and Norman Spack and all his rubbish, and it was always effeminate boys who would have grown up to be homosexual. I think with the original 50 or 40, 49 of them were same-sex attractions and one lied. That's my theory. Right, but I could be wrong. As usual, tell me I'm wrong. So I found this thread going back to June from a Twitter denizen like myself and yourselves, who also has a Substack, which I put the links to in the doobries, as per usual, called Le Canard de Noir, which is French for the black duck. Right, it's also known as Andy. Andy the black duck. How you doing, Andy? You all right? And he did a very interesting thread about this and the questions behind whether or not we should be adopting some kind of research protocol. And his argument is it can't be done ethically. And my argument is it can't be done ethically. My argument is actually why we bother at all. But it can't be done ethically. In which case our biggest concern becomes, is the ethics committee captured? If so, they will go on to damage proto-gay boys, possibly. Possibly, right? So what would an ethical clinical trial into puberty blockers look like is the subject of Quackometer, which is this blog. It's not Substack, I thought it was. Quackometer. So sorry for that, Andy. What would an ethical clinical trial into puberty blockers look like? Well, in light of the Cass review, the new use of puberty blockers for children is now pretty much restricted to those enrolled in clinical trials in the UK. Clinical trials that I personally think should not be going ahead at all. In the UK, the Cass review underscored the lack of consensus and significant gaps in knowledge surrounding the use of puberty blockers, prompting a more cautious and scientifically robust approach to their application. If they were ever to be used in the future. There are currently no trials, just plans to design and start them. Who's behind the plans? Who wants to do it? Why? Good questions to ask ourselves. Before any clinical trials of puberty blockers proceed post-Cass review, there are essential clinical questions that must be addressed. These questions are critical to ensuring that any trial is ethical and can help inform future clinical decisions. These are the questions that must be answered before any ethical trial can take place. And then Andy has kindly spread out, laid out for us the questions that he would like answered. We'll start with one and begin from there. 1. Identifying persistent trans identities. Okay? It's the language of the cult. It should say identifying mental illness. That's all it should say. Which children will maintain their trans identities into adulthood? This is as fundamental as only those likely to persist should be considered for radical treatments due to the profound and potentially destructive consequences of these medical interventions. High confidence in predicting persistence is crucial to avoid imposing unnecessary treatments on children who might naturally desist, which is over 90%, by the way. I think Andy's answered to his own question in that first statement. There is absolutely no reason on God's earth to persist with this treatment that is just Frankenstein and Mengele level horrible, no matter how much we think it helps maybe a few people. It's not ethical for a society to be doing this. It obfuscates about sex. It allows people to hide in plain sight. It's not on. And then they're terribly ill for the rest of their lives. It's not on. Number 2, alternative interventions for adolescent distress. What other interventions can alleviate the distress leading to trans ideation? I'm not convinced, Andy, that it would be adolescence. I'm not convinced. There's some homophobia at the back of this, not from you, Andy, obviously, but there's some homophobia going on here. I can smell it. What other interventions can alleviate the distress leading to trans ideation? We know most children presenting at gender clinics present also with complex psychological needs and conditions, including autism, trauma, and distress over their emerging sexuality. You can add to that being a looked after kid or abuse in the family of some kind. Trans identities may be coping mechanisms for these conditions. It's interesting, isn't it? They've just released the diary of the shooter in America, the one that was trans. You should go and read that. I'm not going to cover it. It's too upsetting, but go and read it. It's all in there. Critical social justice. It's riddled with it. Makes people mental, see? Made this one mental. Shot people. So, trans identities may be coping mechanisms. We understand that. Understanding which psychological treatments are beneficial and for whom they work is essential. Current conversion therapy bans threaten this research, potentially stifling clinical interventions that could relieve distress without resorting to life-altering medications. So in other words, the constant calls from the trans rights activists and such lunatics as Jane Ozane, which is we need to ban trans conversion therapy, which, by the way, doesn't exist. Right? You can't convert something that doesn't exist. Right? We know it's a symptom now. It's not a thing on its own, it's a symptom. It comes with other things. Number 3, the impact of halting natural puberty. What are the long-term effects of stopping natural puberty on brain and body development? Preliminary evidence suggests potential losses in maturity and developmental issues. Detailed studies are necessary to understand these impacts fully. Well, what are you going to do? Feed the kids the drugs? It's just... Andy's raising great questions here. We should be asking and thinking about ourselves in order to make sure we can stop any of this from going ahead. The clinical purpose of puberty blockers is number 4. What is the clinical purpose of using puberty blockers in this cohort? The Cash Review highlighted a lack of consensus. Whether intended as time to think, to reduce psychiatric distress, or for cosmetic reasons, each potential usage has significant problems. Evidence suggests children don't use the time to reconsider options, and the cosmetic window is very narrow. We know that what happens is once you put them on the trans train, it's game over for most. We know this. How can they possibly do a clinical... Look, you're going to have to tell me in the comments. How can they possibly do a clinical trial? Number 5, safety and effectiveness of adult cross-sex hormones. It is the subsequent use of adult cross-sex hormones safe and effective. Puberty blockers are not standalone treatments, but part of a pathway. Comprehensive evaluations of the overall clinical benefits and risks are necessary. And then long-term regret rates. What are the long-term regret rates? While this may correlate with question 1, even persistent trans identities can experience regret due to factors like loss of sexual function. He's laid out much more in this great piece on his website there. Once again, the name of the website is quackometer.net, and I'll put the link in the doobras. Go please do read the full thing by Andy, because it's very well worth it, and we need to consider it. My take is this. No. There you go. That's my take. You're not doing it. End of story. Stay away from these kids, right, and find other ways. You're not doing it. We are not making this ridiculous notion of a trans something that's going to exist for long in this country. We're not going to do it because we can't, because it causes harm to everyone it touches. Everyone it touches. It is iatrogenic at its root, i.e. what we think solves the problem causes the problem. It actually causes more harm. So I think from our perspective, it's going to have to be a resounding no. That's me. That's me. But then I'm just as the same about over 18s. I don't care how old you are, you get none of this. It's not happening. We ban the entire lot. That's the only way to go because it does so much damage. We know the suicide rate post-transition is through the roof. So we know this already. We know it. And the osteoporosis, problems with spines, blindness, all sorts of stuff. All sorts of stuff. Why would we allow people to do that to themselves? Well, we wouldn't normally. It's just because it's trans. Hashtag be kind. You go and have a look and you tell me in the comments what you think. But I think the answer is no. There will be no clinical trials. You are not experimenting on another generation of kids. That's my take. I look forward to hearing yours. Bye-bye.